Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our final Skeleton Crew reaction and review. This is for episode 8. We are going to give you guys all of our thoughts on the finale of season 1 of Skeleton Crew and give it to you in full spoilers. So, if you've not watched the episode, this is your warning. Go watch the episode, come back. We'll be going for an hour and a half to 2 hours tonight, wrapping up Skeleton Crew, talking about this finale, talking about the show as a whole, and giving you guys kind of our full final thoughts here on Skeleton Crew as it does wrap up this week. So make sure you go watch episode 8. Come back if you have not seen it because it is going to be a spoiler filled stream. We're going to get to all of your guys' questions, comments, theories, predictions, anything you'd like to discuss in the chat. We are going to get into that after we give you our initial reaction and review. So keep sending those into the chat if you'd like to support the channel. Guarantee you get a chat on tonight's stream. Super chats are always appreciated, and it's the best way to guarantee you get a chat on the stream. Otherwise, we go first come, first serve. So keep sending them in. We'll try to get to as many as possible. But that is your lock to getting your chat on tonight's stream. All right. So I have a poll going as well in the chat. Started it a while ago. So hopefully you guys didn't vote before the episode came out. But right now, plenty of you are saying that you thought the finale of Skeleton Crew was great. 4 options: great, good, mediocre, or bad. It seems like the majority of you thought it was great. And we're going to give you our reactions here right now. And I'm going to pass it over to you first, Sanak. What were your thoughts on the finale of Skeleton Crew's first season?
This was definitely a very confident finale. I think all of us were expecting like a surprise cameo, like a really strong little public connections, and those things could still be happening, but I don't think it's as necessary as we thought because this is John Watts at his finest. He really wanted to emphasize that these are the characters that have started the story. We're gonna make sure that they get a grand finale, and they're gonna lead the way, and absolutely did. You know, I just the only criticism I wanna kinda get out of the way is that I really enjoyed what the parents got to do. There's some great lines, like, from Wendell, like, "Son, you're looking at a level 7 technician." And it's like he said it like the most nerdy, most Gen X, like, popular way that grew up and, kept being a nerd, right? And it was great. I loved all that. But I wish we just got a little more of them and a little bit more competency, like, and they had like more of a plot with this so-called supervisor, right? Like, I guess it makes sense that far as like, of course he's a droid. He's part of one of the great works, and it's like, yeah, I can see that. That was definitely something you and I were definitely looking at, Liam, from like the first couple episodes, and then we're like, maybe it's the old pirate captain, and then it's like, maybe not. Maybe it's like someone from the old Republic. They went with something that I wouldn't say is necessarily safe, but it's the one that's like, okay, it kind of feels like it's reduced in scope because that would make sense for the parents and what they're ultimately going to do, right? I wish there was more arcs for them. But regardless, I thought this was really awesome. I mean, great action, great visuals. They used the nighttime quite well. I think they were definitely trying to hide as much of the effects as possible because it was very, very effects heavy, but they made it
Mhm.
look really good. I love the speeder bike effects. I think this is probably the best speeder bikes that we've ever gotten, canon or otherwise. So, um, maybe you could say something from like Legends animation, but yeah, I wouldn't really compare that one to one. This is the closest that we've gone to seeing what maybe George Lucas had envisioned for Return of the Jedi and didn't quite nail it yet with that, the technology limitations. But yeah, the action was superb. I really loved seeing Jod and kind of give it like that one quick explanation like, yeah, you know what? I was trained by a Jedi, but only scraps and pieces because I was just a kid in a hole. And then the Empire came and took them away. And kind of like his like almost romantic-esque finish. He's like he sees his ship going to smithereens, the darkness of the galaxy that he's been trying to live with, trying to embrace. Like this is like what is life outside of that and kids. Seeing that kind of go to sh- like waste because of all the things that kids picked up and learned from all the other different planets from the ad systems. Yeah, I mean, it was nice, and it's like a wry smile that I'm like, man, we're gonna see him again. There's no way that
Mhm.
this is just where we leave him, just arrested and left behind, right? Like this isn't a lost star situation where we're still waiting for that book almost well, now almost a whole decade later, right? Like this is a situation where you got a star with charisma who absolutely killed it, with a great set of kids who probably know him a little bit better than he knows himself at this point, and I'd love to see him be in zero conflict, somehow get involved with piracy again or work against pirates, something of that sort. So, like, it'll be really fun to see an evolution for him for sure. Yeah, I mean, I love the lines, I love the action, it felt very well rehearsed and planned out. I love seeing the confidence of all the kids working together, like, we saw, like, different episodes, like, one of them would be doing a little bit better, the others wouldn't. It would be kinda separation, a little stiff, like, you just have to deal with it and, they all kinda have to go on their own journey. Here, it's like, no, they're, like, leading the way, they're like, "Trust KB, trust us, like, we got this, we're gonna do it." So, that was really great to see, like, the kids kinda push the parents, and then the parents really embrace, like, what the kids have learned outside of Atten, and yeah, I mean, I guess I loved seeing the New Republic stuff. I wish there was a cameo, just a little bit. I don't know, you could say maybe if that is a Tantive Eve right there, maybe, right? But I don't know, I don't think it was like a Leia personally, it's probably more like a 9 Nub at this point on that ship, and we didn't get to see anybody, but we got to see B-Wings, which made me definitely whoop a little bit, especially with the cannon, like, extremely strong beams cutting
Mhm.
through. What was that? The last time we saw that was Rebels, probably, maybe Squadrons. So yeah, I was quite pleased by seeing, like, just how the New Republic kinda came in. Still no Carson Teva or nothing, I thought that would be at least a good failsafe, but no, I mean, John Watson crew, feeling like they were confident that this is a story that they wanted to tell. Still leaving the door open for certain things, but they wanted to wrap it up as neatly as they could with the pieces that they have without making it a big interconnected piece. Like this can be something that can be used later, but it doesn't have to exist as something to transition us to a bigger, grander plot line or like another chapter in that story. So
Yeah.
I really do respect that decision. I think this is a finale that while I was definitely enjoying it, I think rewatching it, I'm gonna like it just like I did at every episode a little bit more. So yeah, kinda sad that we're gonna let this show kinda go. I wish there was just a little bit more, a little bit of aftermath, a little bit more with the parents, but man, it was still a great, great ride for all these 7 weeks.
Absolutely. I had a really fun time watching this show. And it maintained that the entire time. Through the ups, through the downs. Uh, this show always was entertaining to me, at least. And I found that enjoyable. That was kind of my benchmark for this. Was like, can it just make me have fun every single Tuesday when these episodes come out? And it absolutely did. I completely agree with you on almost everything you said, especially with the parents. This episode just completely reiterated to me why the last 2 episodes were such a mistake to have them so short. Just anything with the parents, just seeing how desperate they are to get their kids back, having conversations about how much they miss each other. Or Wim's dad is such a big character in this episode. Maybe a scene in one of the previous episodes where he's talking about, I wasn't always the best dad to Wim, but I miss him. There's a lot of me in him from when I was a kid, something like that. Anything to give them character, but they were just the parents until this
Yeah.
episode, and it really felt like that was a big missed opportunity because they could have had a really full-fledged cast that was exciting for the finale, because one of the things I loved that John Watts did here was he gave everyone a moment, and that was great because as we kind of talked about in the first half of the show especially, each episode was giving each character a little piece a little time to shine, a little learning moment in every episode where each character got to use their unique abilities, their unique way of
Mhm.
thinking, their unique attributes in order to solve problems or move beyond and grow, like Neil with the turbo laser that comes back here. You have KB flying the ship, learning to fly the ship, that comes back here. You have Fern's leadership and Wim, his sense of adventure, wanting to be a Jedi. He gets the lightsaber here. There's just a lot of good moments for each character that are well built throughout the entire season. So even episodes like maybe in episode 4 that feel like 90% filler, when we watch them, it comes back here and it's like, well, that moment does pay off in the finale. And I always appreciate when creators are able to wrap up all the threads, especially when they have a TV show, especially when it's a show that does have some episodes that do linger or feel filler at times. And I felt like that a little bit with episode 4, but it came back strongly here, and so it makes you appreciate episode 4 more. So I loved what John Watts did with the kids in this episode, and I loved how he had all these callbacks and had all these moments that I thought worked really well as a fan of the show. But then when you get the parents' moments, you don't feel anything because you don't know anything about them. You don't really care about them whatsoever. So I think that was a big mistake, especially when you have the last 2 episodes so short. This one was short as well. It was only 35 minutes with the credits. I fast forward all the way through the credits because I was like, these credits seem even longer than the last couple weeks when it ended, and I saw that it was only 35 minutes and it was listed as 41. So it was like 6 minutes of credits seems even longer than the last few weeks. So I fast forward all the way through, no end credit scene or anything. So yeah, I don't know why, but I felt like this one was a pretty perfectly paced episode, except for the end. I did feel the end was kind of abrupt. I'm glad they are leaving things on the table for a possible season 2, but I would have loved to see, especially because the show decided to stay so self-contained, no cameos, which I absolutely respect them for not doing any cameos. Could have been easy to just pop Din Djarin in this episode for 5 seconds and then have a promo poster on Instagram saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
look, come watch this because Din Djarin's in it." It would have been so easy to do that, and they didn't. So I really respect that creative decision, holding to this story not really needing to be a part of all that. But at the same time, when you make these episodes short, when you have things that could build as an epilogue maybe in this episode, not necessarily even with Jod, but just with the kids and the families. I would have loved to see, what Atten was like kind of being rebuilt now under the New Republic. Even just 5 minutes of that, I think would have been a cool little send off, especially when you only have a 35-minute episode. But it was a more minor criticism for this week than the last couple weeks. But I think the things that didn't work in this week's finale were more so Skeleton Crew as a whole problems rather than problems with this episode. I still felt like this episode was fairly well paced and it utilized every second of its runtime, utilized the character development and everything we learned about the kids and Jod throughout the entire show extremely well. I love the moment getting a little bit of Jod's backstory that he was, again, now confirmed, not a Jedi from Order 66, not a survivor, somebody who just lived in the galaxy and was discovered by a Jedi, a street rat for all intents and purposes, kind of like an Ezra almost. And it was discovered by a Jedi, but instead of it going well for Ezra and he gets trained by Kanan and develops a family, really, he loses his Jedi master pretty quickly after he's discovered. Not really sure, it ticked a couple logic problems with me with like why would the Empire let him go if he's being trained by the Jedi? I mean, he must have really been able to hide his powers well. And he's obviously not ultra powerful as we see in this episode because he can't pull a lightsaber from like the 2 kids. So maybe there's problems there with I'll let that kind of logic stuff go, but I did really enjoy seeing his or hearing some of his backstory. I think what this episode does really well in setting up a season 2 or if these characters return in something else is it sets up that Jod has been searching his whole life for purpose and for family. We talked about that last week. I forgot who brought it up, but about the juxtaposition between financial treasure and familial treasure and how different people hold different things as in higher regard. And I think the way this ends, you know, Jod is fairly retrospective. He's seemingly standing there watching everything he's built completely destroyed now. His ambitions are all gone. What does he search for in the future? And I think it does set up a pretty plausible kind of anti-hero turn for the character if they wanted to, as he, you know, has nothing basically except these kids and the relationships he's developed with them, even if fake. I think it does set up a fairly promising scene there for the future with that character. Those were our thoughts about Skeleton Crew episode 8, the finale of Skeleton Crew. Let us know what you guys think in the chat. Again, we're going to get through everything you guys sent in. First come, first serve is how we do it. Unless you send in a super chat, then you are guaranteed to get your chat on tonight's stream. So if you see us going a little long, you want to make sure you get your chat on the stream. Send in a super chat. We are going to go for close to 2 hours as we usually do. So here we go. Let's get into the stream. And oh, yeah, before we get into everybody's comments, make sure you hit that like button. We do have a lot more people watching right now than have liked the video. So your like really helps us get our channel out there to more people, get more people in here to discuss Star Wars with us. All right, let's get to the comments. And with this poll running, Star Wars order, I can't really see what your top comment says, so I'm going to pin it just for a second so I can see it. I don't know if you're having that same problem, Sanak, but Star Wars Order says, will you do these topics for a tier list? Hottest female Star Wars characters, lightsaber hilts, Mandalorians, top 10 best characters from both of you. Well, thank you for that question. The first one, I don't think we will do. I can almost guarantee we will not do that topic as of now. Lightsaber hilts possibility, but again, all our tier lists are chosen by our members and our patrons. So if you're a member or a patron, you get to vote every month in what our tier list is, aside from some set ones that we do every year, like when we update our Star Wars rankings, we update our book rankings. We those I think those are the only two we do every year. We do video games when there's a new big game out, and we'll do comics every once in a while. It's been almost 2 years since we've done that, so we might do that one again relatively soon. But yeah, it's really up to our members for that. As for the top tens, we do want to bring top tens back. Kind of the way we used to do it was release two videos, and it would have two each of our individual top 10 lists, but that's double the content, and so there would be always a disparity between which video got watched more. And so what we decided to do, and when changed the format last year, but uh, they weren't as successful, was changing it to have a joint top 10, like the Star Wars lads top 10, and then Sonic and I both make our top 10s, and based on where we would rank everything, that's how the top 10 would shake out. And then in that same video, show what each of our individual lists would look like. So I really want to bring top 10s back. It's something I enjoy doing. I do it on my other channel as well a lot. So it's something that we want to do for this year for sure. But as for the topics for the tier lists, yeah, you can vote on those when they're available for patrons and members every month.
Yeah, only thing I can really add to that is if we're gonna do a top hottest females, we're gonna do top hottest males and people in general, and it's gonna be more of a meme than anything, because that's I don't know, that's extremely subjective. That can be definitely taken the wrong way, and that's not really something we want to put out there. That's some things are great for a channel, some things are maybe better kept to ourselves. So we'll keep it like that. But yeah, I mean, some of those other ones like lightsaber hilts and all that, I thought those
Yeah,
are I think that's pretty cool. I wouldn't
we'd love
mind
to do
stuff like
those.
that. But yeah, maybe not that first one per se. And like Liam said, top tens, we wanna have that be a presence because tier lists, as great as they take a lot more work than our top tens, and we get to say a lot less because we cut out a lot of that because it ends up being like 2, 3 hour recordings for us, and we have to cut them down, and you're getting the most essential parts of it, but you're not kinda getting the conversation around that, and that's what top tens kinda afford itself more. Like, we can have some more fun in it. We can, explain a little bit more about our own assessment, our own viewpoint of Star Wars. So, yeah, yeah, it's a work in progress. If you guys desperately want it and make your voices heard, tell it in the chat here. If you're watching on replay, mention it, right? Like we want to make this almost as equal as tier lists on our channel because when we were having the same level of success, it was a great way to alternate back and forth and sometimes revisit ideas just with different reasons, right? One for more of a visual purpose and one for more of a discussion purpose.
Yeah, now that Skeleton Crew's over and we don't have the prediction series coming out every week, we're always looking for what to do next, and we do have plenty of things on the docket, like things we have videos scheduled for the next week and a half, 2 weeks already, and we're working on beyond, but we always want to know what you guys want. So if top 10s are a big thing for you guys, then we would love to do it. It's certainly something I really want to do. So hopefully we'll bring it back here soon. Then Star Wars Order also says, "What was your ranking of every episode of Skeleton Crew 1 through 8?" Oh, man, that's tough. Something I haven't thought about. Let me pull up the episodes to remember each one. But I think I still would go with episode 5 as my favorite, which was the one where Jod turns. I just thought that was a really solid, complete episode. I thought it had good dramatic arcs for the kids. I thought it had a good arc for Jod. It was exciting. I enjoyed the pirate layer. I enjoyed some of the comedy in that one. I thought that was a pretty good episode, start to finish. I'd probably give the finale second place if I had to think about it. I think this was, as a finale, a really complete finale, and I thought it did a really good job on most notes. And even if it was a little predictable, the whole show being a little predictable, and the show kind of being more targeted at all ages or more, kids getting into Star Wars, I don't really hold some of those things against it that I might for a more adult Star Wars show. So I think this one would be number 2 for me. Then after that, I'd probably say probably last week would be close. I thought last week was really good. It just was too short. It should have had some other things in it. Um, but yeah, looking at the rest of the episodes, I'd probably go episode 7 as number 3, episode maybe episode 3 as number 4, I'm going to say episode 1 is number 5, episode 2 is number 6. And then I would say it's close between what my last and second to last would be. And again, I don't really think any of the episodes in the show were bad. I would say at worst, these were average to mediocre episodes. I probably put episode 6 as my second to last, and then episode 4 as last place. I just felt like episode 4 at the time, while it had some good stuff at the end, it did feel like a relatively filler adventure. I love some of the stuff with Neil, but I think there was more. There was a lot of rich stuff to explore with the rest of these at planets, and that was kind of it. So I think that was a little disappointing as well. And some of the Jod stuff happening all off screen, also found a little disappointing. Other than that, and then episode 6 purely just because it was so short. The content was okay, but especially watching this episode, I think it could have used so much more for these characters and really focused on each of them as you have that big twist in episode 5. So those would probably be my rankings. To reiterate, 5, 8, 7, 3, 1, 2, 6, 4.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm fairly closely aligned with that. I agree, 5 is better than the finale for me just because I don't really have the parents' development that and the whole arc that they could have gone on. Again, it's a little sad that last episode felt like they could have actually spent, like, another 2, 3 minutes, and that would have actually been quite good for them and would have, like, really propelled us in a great place, but it was essentially like a 4 by 400 race. They were passing the beacon one by one by one before getting stunned, right? So, not my favorite choice for that arc that they could have all gone on without, necessarily becoming full on individuals besides Farah and Wendell. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that one hurt it a bit for sure. So I would go episode 5, then episode 8, then I would go episode 7 still, despite that flaw. Then episode 3 with Kim, because I love the design. I thought it was a good, strong introduction for the dynamics and everything. Uh, then I would actually probably go episode 6, just because I was such a huge fan of, like, KB's journey and her arc. She was definitely underserved in that first half, and then you get to see, like, some of the things that she says, like, in retrospect, how she's, like, kind of building up to this big break for her, and I just liked how everyone, like the kids, kinda learned to balance each other out, and that was one thing about this show is, like, there's a girl group, there was a guy group, and there's Judd, and then that episode all together. Again, a little short for my liking, but still, I thought the messages and the way it was executed was really strong stuff, so, yep, 5, 8, 7, 6 no, sorry, 5, 8, 3, s I'm blanking here.
5,
5,
8, 7.
8, 7, 3, 6, uh, 2, 1, and then 4. Yeah. It really was just that fact that, like, Neil's episode while I did love it, and I need him to have his little girlfriend that does a French accent and jump flips about everything to emote. Um, like it felt like something pulled straight out of like a Jedi Apprentice book to me, like setting wise and all that. And like Liam said, there's a lot of richness that could have been covered for all the at planets, but you don't really understand why these groups are warring. It felt very, very like junior novel as a setting when everything else here felt a little bit closer to like A Test Occurs, where it's like pushing a bit more young adult themes and a little bit more seriousness while exploring the mystery of the pirates, of Onyx Cinder, of Jod's backstory, of what's going on at Atten. Uh, I like the ending, of course, for that one. I think that was a great, nice little twist there. But yeah, I just wish there's a little bit more. And I mean, that comes down with the whole show. Like, I wish there was just a little bit more, like 2, 3 minutes each episode. Pad out the parents to make them into their own individual arc, and then you make a little bit more moments and lines that have weight and interest that don't necessarily have to lead anywhere, but then once we reach that finale, how it's kind of played out, you could have even more for that potential season 2 or spin-offs with these kids where they can appear again and the mysteries of and of Tagarin and all that can be explored a little bit further as Jod's fate kind of lingers in the air.
And then Icarus agrees with the top three ranking 587. Said five has lots of comedy with SM33 and character development for Jod. Anthony says eight, five, six, then one. So yeah, and then Icarus also oh 5/7. Yeah. So yeah, let us know your guys' ranking in the chat. Something I didn't really think about ranking the episodes, but yeah, I do think eight. I don't know. I'm always hesitant to put one of the newer ones high because it's recency bias, but I did feel really satisfied with most of the arcs for the kids in this episode, and I thought they did a good job with all of that. Maybe a little bit more pirate carnage too. I would have loved to see. Maybe a
Yeah.
little bit less of the floundering pirates and a little bit more of them actually like fighting people or fighting the droids. I would have loved to see them fighting the droids, but anything like that. But yeah, it's more minor critiques of episode 8. I do think overall the character stuff worked pretty well. Anthony sent in a super chat. Thank you so much, Anthony, for supporting the show. Anthony says the final line of the Revenge of the Sith novel has helped me out personally as a self-help for me as someone who suffers from depression. I've gotten back into the High Republic Adventures comics from 2021, 10 out of 10. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can't tell you I exactly remember what the last line is word for word from Revenge of the Sith. If you want to share, we can share it on the stream. But it is a phenomenal novel. So absolutely happy that it's helped you in a lot of ways. And as for High Republic Adventures, yeah, if you guys are interested in the High Republic or reading High Republic, trying to catch up with High Republic, you haven't checked out the Phase 1 Adventures comics. They are super underrated. I don't know if I'd quite go 10 out of 10 personally, but they are very underrated. Like it's a solid story that starts out very kid friendly and gets a little bit darker, really enhances its characters. It's unfortunate that you do kind of have to read Midnight Horizon for some really big character moments that have been built up the entirety of the comic series and then just kind of are resolved in a novel. So that's a little disappointing about that run, but overall, it's one of the better runs from Dark Horse since they have taken over from IDW. Or that was originally IDW, I think, before
AW, yeah.
the mergers or the switch. So it's one of the better runs from the non-Marvel side of Star Wars comics since Disney's had it. And yeah, definitely recommend it if you guys are interested in the comic side of the High Republic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you could share that, that Revenge of the Sith novel. It really helped you out with your mental health and your depression, and this is definitely a safe space on our channel. Like, Star Wars is meant to be discussed and analyzed and be critiqued for sure, but it's also a place to celebrate, and when you can bring up something like the final line of, like, a super well-respected Legends novel, that only tells me that you're a massive fan of Star Wars in your own way, and we all are, right? But, I can definitely appreciate that, and, I did quite the similar thing, when COVID happened and, almost 5 years ago now, like, I was like, "Well, I'm at home, I'm not feeling great about a lot of things, but what can I do?" And it was Star Wars, right? And, like, first, we started talking, with our group chat, and then We were like, "Oh, man, the Clone Wars season 7, that was so awesome to watch." And then we're like, "Oh my god, we're gonna end the year with Mando season 2, like, when the world is shut down." Like, that was such an incredible thing. You know, for me personally, it was also a nice little October once we got the NBA bubble to go, and I got to see the Lakers, my team won there, so yeah, it was nice to have a couple things there, kinda keep my ear afloat, keep my own well-being afloat, and then we started this podcast and then turned it into a channel, and I'm glad that we can connect with other people who find solace in Star Wars because it should never be a place that is more of a negative than positive. Unfortunately, sometimes that is with the fandom, but the stories themselves, the journeys that all these characters go on, everything that these fantastic writers and creative filmmakers, animators, and everybody who's ever worked on Star Wars put into, I mean, it always shows. Even in, like, stories that you don't love as much, you can always tell that there's a love and a passion for trying to add a little bit more to this incredible story that first began with George Lucas. So, yeah, I'm definitely glad, and, if it's not just you, Anthony, it's anybody on this channel wants to talk Star Wars because that's really the only thing they got, this is always gonna be a welcome space for that.
Absolutely. Want to echo all of the things you said. And Anthony did share the quote here, saying the quote is: "The dark is generous, it is patient, and it always wins, but in the heart of its strength lies its weakness. One lone candle is enough to hold it back. Love is more than a candle. Love can ignite the stars." That is a really great line. And thank you so much for sharing that and sharing in these streams with us. We always appreciate you coming and joining and discussing Star Wars with us. You're always one of the first people here, and we recognize that, and we really appreciate you and your contributions to this community and this channel. So thank you so much, Anthony. We really appreciate that, and looking forward to more conversations here in the future as we move on from Skeleton Crew. Back up to the top is Star Wars Order, who says, "Who is your favorite character from Skeleton Crew?" It's a good question, and it's one that, my mind really immediately goes to two characters, and I think they're a lot of people's favorites, and that's Neil as the, fun companion character, solid amount of depth for a fun companion character, but he is just really the lovable member of the crew. So definitely always love that type of character. That's somebody I usually gravitate to a lot. Like I'm a big fan of like Samwise Gamgee and characters like that. And even though Sam is certainly more important to his material than Neil, um, it's that lovable sidekick that I always do really gravitate towards. So Neil, and then of course Jod. I think Jod is the best developed. He's the most interesting. Jude Law's performance is obviously the best of any actor or character in this show, and I think he really delivers on an interesting archetype for a character from the New Republic era and canon. It's a type of character we have seen plenty of back in Legends, especially 90s Legends, where you have these kind of wild card force users, these force users that weren't hunted down by the Empire, or these force users that might have come up or really found themselves or matured when the Inquisitorius was starting to fade, when you had the Empire's focus shift from hunting down Jedi and people related to the Jedi religion to fully focused on beating a full-on rebellion during the Galactic Civil War. And so I find that kind of character archetype really interesting because we all, often want to say, oh, anybody who has the Force, you got to be a Jedi, got to be a Sith. But no, I mean, the Force chooses people. The Jedi discovered them when they were in power, when they were able to find them. They would, discover these kids and bring them to the temple. But there are plenty who didn't get found. The Ezra Bridgers, the Jod Nanawoods, these types of characters, I think, are always pretty interesting. How they learn to use their powers or their inherent gifts to grow and shape their realities in their own paths away from kind of a religious doctrine. And I think that's something fascinating that when you do it with a character who becomes a full-on hero, I think has the potential to become anti-hero in the future, was kind of an anti-hero for the beginning of the show. When you do it with a character with mixed morals, it's always pretty fascinating. So I found Jod really interesting. I think he can be even more interesting in future material. And so he's probably my favorite overall, but Neil is the one that has that place in my heart.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only one answer, and it is Neil. When I saw him get his speeder bike blown up, I was like, no, like, don't do this to my boy. But, and I just love the cute little, like, roll away out his off screen to get into safety.
Yeah,
It's everything that he does. Like, he's such a cute hero, right? And he is ultimately still a sidekick, but I think that also does raise a pretty interesting point. Like, if you look at The Goonies, right, which this is a show more inspired by that than necessarily Stranger Things or something, you've got characters that kinda start as the leads and end up as the leads. Maybe you got one that maybe looks like they're threatening for a bit, but they always fade into the background a bit. They're always like a second tier, and especially when there are adults in the story, they play a role, without a doubt, but they're mostly like there to give their kids hugs at the end, like, "Oh, man, wow, incredible what you figured out in this." Right? But this was a show that I thought was pretty interesting that I mean, took those expectations with Fern and Wim, one's kid dreaming about being a Jedi, the other one's the rebel who also got, like, side hustle as straight A student. And these first couple episodes, in some ways polar opposites, but still definitely leading their respective friend and the way they wanted to pull the story. And then once you saw KB and Neil's kind of story kind of get fleshed out and Jod kind of bounce between every single one of them, and like all the different scenarios that they were going through, you got to see KB and Neil become equal characters, right? And other stuff like Stranger Things and all that that could kind of be looked at as like, oh, this great lead character's kind of been. I never felt that because they were still allowing KB and Neil's development to impact and shape how Fern and Will were acting. So I thought that was pretty good. And, like I said, I did appreciate that the finale had the parents do some stuff too, instead of just being like, "Oh, you saved the day." Like, no, that didn't happen. But, again, some more behind them. But all that to say, because everyone kind of got a chance, a fair shot in this show for the most part, I think that ultimately actually pushed up KD as my number 2 character because I really liked her confidence and growth. Like, she went from this very quiet girl, very much the representative for disabilities and all that, like, how she used a visor so frequently to hide herself and her emotions. Like, that's what her actor was telling, in interviews and all that. And you got to see that, like, it became, like, a cool mask for her. Like, now it's game time. I'm locked in. I'm using it as just another part of me, not something that I have to, like, hide and cower behind. It's like once she got that new filament in the back of her head, it's like she was reborn. Like, I just like the small little choices. I feel like they did something a little bit with her hair too, where it was less straight and, like, robotic, a little bit more wavy so that she's, like, growing emotionally as a person. And yeah, she had a great role in this finale. So I think I really enjoyed all that and how she got to bring back SM-33 too and use him like, hey, I got a pilot. He just got to hold up his head to see past the ground and stuff like that that I think humanized her and not only second and double down on Fern's belief in her, but also had her be someone who's supportive and pushes Neil and him in their own respective arcs and what they've learned. I thought that was a great way for the show to ultimately reveal that they are a crew. They're not just, like a couple of kids being led by a couple other kids. So, yeah, big fan of those 2 characters. I will say SM-33 too, but, I wish that he didn't necessarily just have to pop up like that, and that was it. Like, it was cool more for him, especially because I think he can dive into a lot of the Tag Reddit stuff, but hopefully that's for something with, like, a season 2 or some spinoff with these kids where he can show up again.
Yeah, I agree. SM-33 is one that was absolutely kind of my favorite character of the first half of the show. He was so good, and Nick Frost did a great job with that character. So I'd probably put him at number 3, but it is a bummer that he kind of fell out of the show to once that twist happened in episode 5. He really kind of phased out of the show, and his role started to dissipate. But can't wait to see more of him in the future, hopefully. And our audience is sending in a lot of different choices for theirs. Icarus says KB and SM-33. Yeah, I thought KB did have a really strong arc as well. Icarus also says Jaw definitely interesting. I hope they continue his character in other shows. I hope they do as well. I do think if and I hope if the show is really discovered later down the line, as we've seen just with our coverage, how many more people have watched it since the Christmas New Year's break for a lot of people, and they've gotten a chance to check it out. We've seen how much the audience has grown just for our show alone. Hopefully, it's grown for Skeleton Crew. This was never going to be a an instant hit, a Nielsen top 10 hit. This was kind of an experiment, and I think if even with the high budget, I think if Lucasfilm and Disney are mindful of the fact that it's not really a show that has all the hallmarks of Star Wars that really makes people think, "Oh, I've got to watch this to interest to be part of the current storyline in Mandalorian and Star Wars." This didn't really hit any of those notes or beg people to watch it for plot, and so hopefully that everybody keeps their head about it and says, as it was, it's a fairly critical success. It's a fairly big audience hit. Most people seem to really enjoy it, and hopefully they look at that and say, "Well, maybe we can double down on the marketing." Because I think we can all be in agreement that the marketing was next to nothing for this show. They barely marketed it. I feel like a little bit of social media marketing. I don't think I ever saw like a TV spot for this on TV. Maybe a few before the show started, but once the show started, I don't remember really seeing anything. I think this was a very sparsely marketed show, probably to make up for the fact that the budget was fairly high, and so they tried to recuperate some of those costs by not putting as much in marketing and just letting word of mouth take it. And I think word of mouth is slowly helping the show, and hopefully, if it is a Disney Plus darling and slowly grows its audience, hopefully we get a season two. I would love it if they announced a season two right off the bat and just showed confidence in this, but more than likely it'll be a little bit before we hear about season two. Maybe Celebration in April, but I think that would be about the earliest. But yeah, so thanks for that. Anthony says, I think all the characters are awesome. Icarus says they're all great, and I think it makes a good show. I agree. I think this show is built on the back of its characters more than anything. The plot is fun, it's interesting, something we've seen before with the Star Wars setting, but it really is the characters that drive the goings on, and I think they all really do get a chance to grow and shine. Maybe not quite instant classic characters like some of these 80s inspired or 80s style adventure shows, but I think they're all set in a good direction to continue to grow if we do more shows.
Yeah, it's great. It has been a fun ride. It's just a matter of, will it be something that picks up? Like people are saying, Andor had a lot of word of mouth. Yeah, that's true. It definitely absolutely did. And I think the fact that it has a much more mature tone and some insane monologues and some still pretty cool action, like especially like the way they blocked the heist and everything.
Mhm.
That's still a highlight. And then, they had some big names like Andy Serkis and Diego Luna. We had Forrest Whitaker. It's like they
Stellan
had,
Skarsgård.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Stellan is like the lead, basically, the co-lead. It's like, yeah, it's like eventually you got to check that out. These are kids, these are nobodies, right? And like a lot of great movies and shows, they start off as unknowns, they no longer are unknowns, and I think a lot of their performance. We heard rumors that like they had to do a lot of reshoots to make this all work out. Like the kids are aging a little bit, and like they had to hide some scenes and all that. I honestly don't know. I feel like it's maybe the parents more than anything 'cause the kids knocked it out of the park. So, yeah, season 2, can it be built up? Yeah. I mean, hopefully we get like by the 5th or 6th episode, it cracking into Nielsen and staying all the way through the finale. That was something that I think Andor achieved. Unfortunately for Acolyte, it kind of got that for a couple episodes and then like tapered out. I don't know if it's like I think either 7 or 8 missed Nielsen for that week, and then the other one made it. So, like, I don't think this is a show that's gonna have that problem where it's gonna taper off and its audience is gonna like leave it week after week. I think this is a show that's like, oh hey, like there's some people watching who are just Star Wars fanatics. Okay, like that's a couple of their friends by like week 3 or 4. It's like, all right, it's the holidays, you're all together. Let's watch this new Star Wars show. Oh wow, this is really good. Everyone who has watched it who's been telling me they're right. Now I'm hooked onto it. And then let's say 6, 7, and 8 are just a good, strong or stretch of like the episodes all blowing up because it's not just based on the episode, it's like the total minutes watched with that episode and everything and with the show. So I I wish that it was a little longer. That would have definitely even helped it a bit more for Nielsen. But at the end of the day, as great as Nielsen is as like an understanding for us general viewers, and like a nice way of collecting data, Streaming is not the same as TV. It's not one to one. Nielsen's not 100% updated to that. All of these companies keep and hide their data. It's a matter of like how well is this show doing for a multitude of reasons. Like if we're hearing like Skeleton Crew figurines are flying off the shelves and merch is
Mhm.
like picking up in the last few weeks. If we're hearing that like more people are watching the finale 2 weeks after the finale actually came out, stuff like that, I think is going to be a bit bigger indicator. And like I don't wanna be too critical on Acolyte and how its, like, finale ended because I think it was generally well received compared to a lot of the rest of the show, but it was, like, within a week or 2, people are like, "Okay, it's done." Like, that was it, right? I expect this to have a little bit more of a path like a Mando season 2, a to some degree, Book of Boba Fett, and, maybe, like, the week after Ahsoka. But some of the animated shows where, like, they start kicking in a little bit more that have legs for 1 or 2 weeks where people are like, "Finally, I gotta catch up, and man, that was a good ride. I wish I was there." The whole time it's coming out. So I think that Andor, obviously too, like how much it like stayed around and kept growing its numbers after its finale. That's what the show's got to be going for. So if you feel strongly about the show like we do, like tell your friends, man. Like it's gonna be word of mouth. Like Liam said, it's not a lot of marketing here. They're not like doing a huge amount of social media marketing like they did for Acolyte. The trailers that they did put were well done, but not as many promos, right? We didn't get a poster every week like we did for a lot of these shows.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, if
No
you want this show to
cameos.
be, yeah, no cameos. If you want people to hear about it, you got to be the change you want to see.
Absolutely. And I do think they'll be easier on it with the numbers than most shows, than like The Acolyte with the massive amount of marketing they put into that show and all that stuff. I think all those play into a factor. And generally what helped Andor and what is helping this is that they're both well received by critics. I think the big difference between this and Andor is that Andor was, Emmy nominated for best show. It was beloved by people. It was on a lot of rankings of the best shows of the year when it came out. It was, considered the best thing Disney Plus had made, and
Ever
they had
for
already committed to season 2. Like, they had already greenlit season 2 before season
yeah,
1 came out. So that was kind of a different scenario, but I still think if they hadn't, they would have done season 2 because it would be such a, it would be such sign of like we only care about views with our stuff if
yeah,
Andor of all things getting all those accolades was canceled just because it wasn't hitting the marks they were hoping for. So I think there's different criteria for the 2 shows, but similar the biggest similarity is for sure the fact that both were slow starters, and I think this is not gonna get to the heights of Andor. Also, when you're comparing Nielsen, right, Nielsen is total hours watched for the shows, so if you have a bunch of episodes out, if you were just to look at the Nielsen rankings of the Star Wars shows, the more seasons, more episodes, all that stuff, the more hours you have because, we are, we're adding up more things together, right? So that's a kind of a given. So when you have Andor, it's 12 episodes, more
12
hours versus
episodes. Yeah,
Skeleton Crew, 8 episodes, less hours. And Andor also kept its episodes to the 40 to 50-minute mark for the majority of them, whereas Skeleton Crew had at least half of the episodes under 40 and a few under 30. So yeah, it was. I think it's going to be judged by different criteria, but overall, I do think the show will get a season 2 because of the general enjoyment around it, and that's something that a lot of what Disney Plus Star Wars ha- has been can't really boast about. And I think they're looking for whatever's their hits. Mandalorian hit turned into their big thing. It was well received. Andor was a hit critically, so they kept going with it. I think Skeleton Crew is kind of that next wave, and maybe that's just because low expectations. I would kind of agree with that. I don't think it's necessarily better than some of these mixed reviewed shows like Ahsoka or something, but it's more tame. It's directed at a different audience. It's just supposed to be fun, and it hits those notes well. So definitely something I hope gets a season 2. But going back up to the top, we had Star Wars Order who says, "Are you guys hyped for Andor season 2?" Speaking of season 2s, I couldn't be more hyped for Andor season 2. I'm really excited, even though we have about 3 full months between now, a little over 3 months between now and Andor starting. it's one of the more exciting starts to a year for Star Wars in recent memory. I can't recall this type of excitement around a second season of Star Wars TV because even for Mando season 2 or Mando season 3, Mando season 1 was not, I didn't think, was like a revolutionary game-changing season of TV. I enjoyed it, but it didn't have me like over the moon hype for season 2. I was pretty hyped for season 3 of Mandalorian, more so than I think I was originally for season 2. But I think Andor, just with the high quality, it's definitely my most hyped second season of a Star Wars live action show that we've gotten from Disney Plus.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can only get the same things, honestly.
Star Wars Order says, which character from Skeleton Crew did you guys wish you got more from? It's all the parents, especially Wim's dad and Fern's mom. Those were the ones that really, really needed more because they are big characters in the finale. They make some big decisions, and other than just their parents and they love their kids, we don't really know anything about them. So most of their motivation in this episode, which is fine. It's fair for the character development they've given them. It's not like they have some big transcendent moment that you wish, okay, well, why is this character having that moment? It's not like they really have that. So it's nothing too crazy for this episode for them, but with their heavy involvement in the finale, I would have preferred to at least see more scenes from them across episode 6 and 7.
Yeah, I agree. It is the parents. They missed the arc that was, I honestly, I feel like was there with just talking. Like we didn't even necessarily need action past their like very weak attempt, right? Like that should have been kind of almost the point. Like, oh my God, like it's such a restrictive system, and we're still playing by the rules. Like we kind of have to work with what we got. Who else is going to provide these materials? Like, how'd you do this? Like there was chances for them to kind of have a little bit more of like the stuff we saw when they were first sat down about their kids being past the barrier. And it's annoying because I think it would have been nice to have been like, oh, like some of these parents might have even grown up with each other, like all in the same generation. Like maybe reveal a little bit more about how, you know, society planning is here at and like, oh, we're all in the same year. And then I hear the next generation is like 3 years after just for safe population growth and like that could have been like some interesting stuff that isn't even necessarily about what they're doing with their kids and how they're trying to help them, not the corporate espionage that we expected, but at least things that could give us some more understanding about at and past, hey, like a fun little suburbia, right? So, yeah, I think that disappoints me. And like I said, the relay handoff was, it's not as silly, but I put that kind of there with like the Princess Leia running from her
Yeah,
uh, future captives. That one
I
just
suppose.
isn't really shot super well. Yeah, the Vespas, you could say like, "Oh, it's not super fast. It could have been sped up or something." And that's a show that has, like, a character doing a goofy spin that people are yelling about, but I'm like, "I like that. That's silly. I want my Star Wars. I just wish the Vespas weren't, like, slower than kids on tricycles," It was just like, "Is this really that threatening for most Vespa?" Like, it kinda goes in there. It's probably the least egregious one because they are kinda being shot at from long distance with stun guns and they're trying to like navigate a little bit, but they're scared and nervous and they're just trying to get it to the next person. But yeah, and also didn't last too long. I think that's what helped it too. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, parents for sure. And I would it's not really a character, but if you're gonna show it to me, like if you're gonna show B-wings, I need more. I always want more B-wings. Like that was one of the biggest things about Return of the Jedi and the Battle of Endor up in space that it was cut. That they couldn't get the blue screen to work with how thin the blades were of the B-wing, and they just had to minimize how many shots there were, which could have really changed how that ship functioned, changed its power capacity and all that. It's great that they've kept the canon explanation very visually clear with the superpowered lasers and all that. I just wish there was more because you're gonna show me a B-wing. I need more.
That's a great one too, and I think the parents for me are purely from story reasons, not really because I care about them that much. Purely for story reasons, I would pick the parents. I think just more of a personal pick, SM33, I would have loved to see more in the second half of the show. I think we really fell off of him. I would have liked to see more of him, more of Captain Brutus doing some brutal things because he was a really
Yeah.
cool design. I would have loved to see Captain Brutus a bit more. And then as for like the main characters, I do feel like Wim is the one of the three that is the most underserved, or at least his personality is the most traditional or kind of basic. He's kind of the the main protagonist in the sense that he's just the good kid who wants to go on an adventure and have fun. And I think he could have gotten some more moments for him because you don't get as many moments for him, and some of the moments for him just kind of come out of nowhere. And there's like a little scene with Jod. So I would have liked a little bit more for Wim because I think the other three all get their moments. They get their like scene to break down. They get their scene where they're learning something. And Wim kind of gets advice, but then he gets advice from the villain. So it's like, later on the show, what does he fully learn from that? If he doesn't even really reference that conversation again when he's making certain decisions. So I would have loved to see a little bit more from that character as well, just with how important he is. But certainly the parents would have made the show a little bit better, I think. Star Wars Order also says, which confirmed upcoming project are you guys most excited for? Mine is Ahsoka season 2. Ahsoka season 2 is certainly up there, especially with the rumors that have been out the last couple days
Yeah.
about Obi-Wan being in the show, and you guys know that anything Obi-Wan's in is going to make it instantly exciting for me. And I think it is about time. If it is not a flashback and if it is Force Ghost, I think might as well just rip off the band-aid and use Ewan McGregor. He's beloved enough to use him as a ghost. If you're going to use Hayden Christensen, might
Yeah.
as well. And you could, I really am interested to see what they would do with him. Would they do Ewan McGregor at the same age of like Revenge of the Sith Obi-Wan, like we've seen with Anakin? Because George Lucas's excuse always was that, well, that was the last time Anakin was truly a Jedi. Even though I would argue he's back to being a good guy Jedi when he kills Palpatine, and then you see him take off the helmet, which is the original version that's in the. But regardless of that, I'm glad Hayden's in the show. I've enjoyed Hayden in the show, and I'm interested to see if they go with Ewan McGregor that way, or if they try to age him up and make him look like Alec Guinness, which I would also really love. I'd love to see the Alec Guinness version of Ewan McGregor. So that would be what I would lean more towards, is having them do that. And since they've already said it in canon that Alec Guinness is the Force Ghost version of Obi-Wan, I would prefer they don't just be like, oh yeah, now he's changing his appearance just to look like Ewan McGregor for an episode for some reason. But regardless of that tangent, Ahsoka season 2, certainly one of my top things. But I feel like other than Andor, which is here, it's happening, and with Star Wars, it's hard to trust the track record and hard to trust that anything is actually happening when it gets announced. Andor, I feel like, is maybe my most anticipated just because it's right around the corner and it's happening. And I love the first season so much and all of that. So I feel like that's top, but it's hard to get more excited for a show than a movie. I'm really excited for Mandalorian and Grogu. And the more and more we start hearing about it over the last few months, really, with Rhoda and now Imbo and all these things that might be in it, it sounds like a wild, really fun movie, kind of self contained, more season one esque. I'm pretty excited to see what that is. But right now, I don't know if I could put it higher than Andor and Ahsoka season twos for me. I think those are still top, and I still don't fully trust that Filoni's movie's coming out. Otherwise, I'd probably put that at the top. I still don't fully trust that Dawn of the Jedi is happening, even though there's rumors about it shooting soon. If some of those things were actually really like happening, if they were shooting, if they were done, then maybe I'd put those higher. But right now, I think I got to go with Andor.
Yeah, and I'm pretty much in the same boat. I would say honestly, it does make a lot of sense to have you in Ahsoka, just because how are you going to introduce like this strong connection to the Mortis guys tease at the end of the show without at least kind of showing it a little bit, or like reinstalling the memories to Ahsoka? Like I'm sure Anakin and Obi-Wan have it now that they're part of the Force, but Ahsoka, for
Mhm.
the most part, I would assume has it wiped unless something happened to her that we still don't know about. That's kind of going to get like retcon in from her initial death before she gets saved by Ezra through the way of the world, world between worlds. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. You could do kind of the aging thing, like how we saw the older Ahsoka. You know, you could do characters that we haven't seen in a while, like a Qui-Gon and all that, if they really want
Mhm.
to. I think at that point, it starts becoming too much of a cameo fest. I think it should just be that original 3, and the 2 experiences that they all kinda had and shared together with Mortis itself, and then the individual journeys that they went through. So, you gotta explain Morai. I think Anakin and Obi-Wan will be a great way of connecting that, and the son and the daughter and the father and all that. So, that'll be pretty important, and I wanna see how Balin kinda plays into that, and if he's gonna go kind of Mortis arc of sorts before the final confrontation and all that. And then where Sabine kind of plays into that, what Shin's role is. Like, there's a lot of great pieces set up for the show. Even if it landed a little softer at the end there, anytime I rewatch it from start to finish, I'm like, man, I just really enjoy it, flaws and all. So I'm excited for sure, but it is really Andor season 2. I think personally, 3 seasons would have been perfect. I am of the opinion that no matter how great all the episodes are, like 3 or 4 year, the block being a year leading straight into that first scene with Cassian and Rogue One, while it'll be handled pretty well, I just don't know how they're gonna do it. Is it gonna be super specific storylines where you have a couple cameo characters like a Krennic for one arc or something like that? Um, and then in those arcs, are you gonna say like, okay, Mon Mothma has one specific arc, and then where she's the lead, and then she pops in here and there for Luthen and Cassian and the other ones? I don't think so. I feel like they're gonna have to make it fairly big, with how many characters they already have. You don't bring in a Krennic just to be like, "Hey, hello." Like, you're trying to make him be the big dog there even more than he ever is in Rogue One. So, yeah, it's gonna be interesting, how that's gonna be handled. I don't know if it's gonna be at the very, very slow, uh, very thoughtful pace that season 1 had, but I wonder if it's gonna be almost like a swing to the almost the opposite end where, like, there's just so much, and I think the best way to alleviate that is just make them longer episodes. Because 'cause I'm not gonna complain. I'd love to have, everything basically be like a one-hour film, but, we'll see how that plays out, and yeah, definitely the one I'm excited for the most. Past that, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm excited for like the multimedia initiative of High Republic to come to an end here with Phase 3's second half. Um, Past that, oh man, we don't really know anything, right? I guess I could put Mandalorian and Grogu. It's just now it feels like a live action The Clone Wars movie with Embo, with Rada. It's like, are you just having like a little goofy fun, like very George Lucas 2006
Yeah.
vibes when he first introduced it? I don't know. I don't know. At the end of the day, I want that film to be as standalone as possible and get this even 1 and 2 vibes that people are missing. But I still do think you have to service season 3 and what it's doing to connect everything. You have to service in some way Book of Boba Fett, hopefully have some connections to Skeleton Crew and Ahsoka, and then leave threads for like the Shadow Council for whatever Sigourney Weaver's character is going to do. Because I'd love her to be a member of the Shadow Council that kind of like sent someone in her steed, and or is working directly for someone on the council. And Thrawn is around, and you get to see maybe a cameo from him or something. Like I'd still like to see all that happen, and the New Republic to fully uncover the threat that is now here. It's not just Thrawn; it's Thrawn and this resurgent empire coming for them, right? So however the story handles it, you can start us small, but then open us up into that new world again that can be explored with another film for sure as the primary place to go, but at least gives threads that even if they don't feel super important, other shows are like, okay, this is a great chance for Boba to kind of come back into the fold here, and maybe he interacts with the pirates of Skeleton Crew and like other associates and allies, and maybe once Ezra kind of comes back to the main galaxy, how does he interact with a Luke and maybe bring their story with Luke, Han, and Leia? Like, there's so many ways to approach it. I just want the movie to stay simple and then tease all the possibilities at the end, like season 1 and season 2 do.
Star Wars Order asks a question next that I've been trying to think about my answer for the last few minutes, and I really can't come up with it. It's if you could erase only one scene from Star Wars, what would it be? But only one. Well, Star Wars, as a franchise, it's got plenty of bad scenes. It's got plenty of bad moments. It's got plenty of things that you could erase. But then if you erase some of the cringy moments from the prequels, what about the memes? You'd lose those memes. You'd lose the
Yeah.
I don't like sand.
I
Um,
wish I could just wish away these feelings.
you'd lose all that if you got rid of if you erase the scene where they're sitting by the waterfall, you'd lose that meme. So what about that? But then you like, for me, my least favorite thing that's not the holiday special is The Acolyte, and I don't think erasing a scene from it is gonna make it better. So there's that, or the Rise of Skywalker in the same way. It's like erasing a scene doesn't really make it better. Maybe erasing the part where he goes, "You're a Palpatine." Um, that would erase the part that she is a Palpatine, maybe. Because I didn't like that. But one of the things I go back to, and this would also, say if you erased it when it was made, then it would hopefully make something better in the future. Is I go back to this a lot on our channel, and you guys might know what I'm going to say. And it's in The Last Jedi. If you just erased Luke dying and you let him have that moment, but it started his adventure into the story, and then you have him as a main character in The Rise of Skywalker or whatever episode 9 would have been had Luke been there. I think that would have made not just The Last Jedi a little bit better and a little less controversial, because I think then people's take on Luke is like, well, all we get from Luke is this version of him, and then he's gone, and we don't get any more. I think that makes it a little bit more palatable for those people who don't like that version of Luke. And I also think then you actually finally get the version of Luke that you might remember from Legends, or a version of that in episode 9 had he survived, or a version of him that could go toe to toe with Palpatine if they still did that, or a version of him that could go toe to toe with whoever the big villain of episode 9 was, and at least you like kind of see him go out with lightsaber dueling and all those different things. So that's something to me that came to my mind instantly, because I just feel like if the question is erase a scene now with everything set up, then I wouldn't erase that scene because he's already not in the Rise of Skywalker, so it wouldn't affect the movie. But if you're saying I could go back to 2016 while they're editing the movie, 2017 while they're editing the movie, and say don't put this in and put him in episode 9, I think that might be the one I would do.
I don't know, man. I don't want I don't like the idea of erasing anything in Star Wars. We've seen how the fans reacted with the fairly logical decision by Disney to be like, "Hey, we have to erase the timeline." Like that's gotta push it to another thing and call it Legends. Like we can't fill in the gaps, we can't plug it in, we can't adapt. Right? That was a smart business decision for them. Right. And as much as I still agree still that a lot of later Legends is still far better than what we've gotten in a lot of most canon, where we're at right now with like Manaverse and all that, it feels very much like just like a half step to a step above what I feel about a lot of the lesser Bantam novels, where I'm like, okay, that's it. Like this was written. Crystal Star is a thing. That the whole Callista trilogy, like, nah, I'm not fans of any of that stuff, right? Like I'll read it, but I'll be like, oh, okay, I read it and that's it. Never gonna touch that again, right? That's how I feel about a lot of Star Wars, and that's how I feel about a lot of shows and a lot of books and movies, right? Like I just want to be a completionist. So if it means it's gonna be cheesy, if it means it's gonna be something I disagree with, I'm fine, honestly. I really am fine with that, right? I can criticize something without saying, "I need this gone," right? That's not really in my personal nature. Um, maybe I could say like, "Oh, erase McClunky," right? But then it's like, no, man, like that's just like the cherry on top of like a scene that's been modified and changed so many times. So I would say erase the decision by George Lucas to have Han not shoot first, right? Like that's the only way I would approach this answer. It's like a decision being made, right? Like kind of how Liam did. Like he's saying like just reshoot a little bit different. Like don't have the Falcon emerge from the twin suns that he sees on his stay at man,
Octo,
forgetting the
yeah.
Octo, right? Like that, something like that, right? And it's my okay, George Lucas. You've seen Han shoot everybody else first. Let's make sure that it stays the same and his literal original shot, right? That's the only thing I would say. Like that's honestly the only thing about the despecialized edition. Once I finally get around to watching it, that I want to see. Just how does it happen? How it was meant to happen, right? That's really it. You can say change the cheese, you could say erase the sequels, whatever you want to say. That's fair game, but it's just not in my nature to say I don't like, I want this gone. It's like I've always known Star Wars to be a flawed franchise. That's kinda what I love about it, that it's so quirky, that it's built upon itself in a way that's not homogenous in a way that, like, sometimes the Marvel Cinematic Universe feels, or sometimes how Lord of the Rings feels to kinda stripping away a lot of things, especially Game of Thrones, stripping away a lot of its magic and a lot of the interesting subplots that could have been way more interesting and appealing and set up a far better end to that story, right? So, yeah, that's how I approach it, just really that decision by Lucas to erase the Han shot because Solo reaffirmed that he's gonna shoot first. That was the lesson he learned from Tobias. He's like, "I'm not gonna
Mhm.
waste around my time and be shot when I know what I need to know," right? So that's how I look at it. Not a scene, more of a decision.
Well, we're about halfway through our stream. We're going to go closer to 2 hours tonight, give you guys a big grand finale for Skeleton Crew. But again, another call towards the people out there who are lower in the chats in the chat order where we go through chat first come first serve. If you want to make sure you get a chat on tonight, send in a super chat, helps the channel out. Make sure you get your chat on. If not, no worries. We're going to keep going through and try to get to yours as well. All right, so our next one from Star Wars Order is a non-Star Wars question. What other movie shows do you guys enjoy watching personally? I love The Rookie, Cobra Kai, and a few Marvel projects here and there. Well, that's a very loaded question because, we could go on forever about the things we enjoy watching. I've said before on these streams, I'm more of a movie guy than a show guy. I really love the idea of being able to start and finish a story in a couple hours or 3 hours or less, usually. I do watch shows. Most of them are newer shows because I can keep up with it and I don't have to do tens of hours of binging TV. And I know that's
Yeah.
something a lot of people love, not disparaging that. I've loved it when I've done it, but it's just hard to motivate myself to do that. So when I do watch TV, it's usually something newer that I can jump on, or it's a lot of times I watch animated shows. I've watched a lot of anime. I've watched a lot of superhero animated shows. I've watched um, Avatar in the past. Those types of things. 20 minutes and it's over, and then you can keep going with it. So those are kind of generally the type of stuff I like to watch when I'm not watching Star Wars. But yeah, I mean, if you want to know our personal favorites, that's something that could go on for a million years about, and I don't know if we want to start that whole rabbit hole because it'll go on a really long time. And might want to save that if you want to come back next week and for all our other shows. We do basically a full open Q&A. So if we want to, since we kind of want to keep this show more towards Skeleton Crew, I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole. But if you want to come back next Tuesday, same time, 7:30, ask that same question, like, what's your favorite movie or what's your favorite shows? We can try to elaborate and go on a deeper answer about that there, because it's gonna be a 10-minute answer from each of us, and I don't think we should spend that much time away from kind of the skeleton crew aspect of tonight's show.
Yeah, yeah, and like Liam said, both love movies, we both love shows. We're both film majors. That's how we met. So, uh, you're asking us, hey, rank your number one to five films. Like it changes. It's so much, and
Yeah.
like some of the stuff we'll say, let's be honest, it's gonna be a little esoteric sometimes too, right? So it's like not something that's maybe perfectly suited for a, skeleton crew finale. But, come back next week, save that question, and we'll definitely answer it there.
Yeah, I do really have like I don't know how many, but like a solid like 6 or 7 for me that are like my holy movies. Like nothing really ever cracks into those, and they're the ones that really changed my life and changed my viewing habits. And so those would be like, for me it would be Empire Strikes Back and Revenge of the Sith, or the two. Revenge of the Sith is my favorite movie ever. It's just the one that really made me fall in love with movies. Lord of the Rings, but specifically Return of the King, Godfather, Pulp Fiction, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I would throw in The Shining also there was number 7. So that's kind of a brief, like not necessarily in order, but a brief kind of like my holy movies that will just always be there for me. Um,
All right, yeah, fair enough. I'll just throw in guess I'll throw in my letterbox top 4 then if we're gonna do that. Um, but before that, I'll say the last movie I saw was yesterday when I went to see Anora. So if you ever watched that,
Great movie.
um, good on you. You're gonna definitely see a lot of weirder stuff from our recommendations for sure. Uh, but my top 4 in no particular order: Zodiac, 20th Century Woman, Tampopo, and The Long Goodbye. So, uh, I'm sure there are films that Liam has also seen just like that. I know he's definitely a little bit more on the pop culture side than I am sometimes, but I mean, he's putting out the masterpieces of pop culture. So I'll give you some as an opposite that aren't necessarily pop culture, but make you appreciate different things about film.
All right. So then the next question we've got Anthony, who says, I have really loved Skeleton Crew as a whole, 8.5 to 9.5 easy. Well, that's a really high praise for Skeleton Crew. Really glad you enjoyed it. Usually we do give rankings for these shows. Usually we do it out of 5. I forgot to do that while we are doing our review. So for me, it's tough. It's a tough one because I'm pretty harsh grader when it comes to TV and movies, more so than like our book reviews. I'm a little less harsh grader there because I don't read that many novels outside of Star Wars. I'm very much so a Star Wars focused reader and a lot of sci-fi and fantasy when I read outside of Star Wars. So it's kind of all in the same genre. So I'm not comparing it to the great American literary works, or at least the ones I have read. I'm not really comparing it directly to Star Wars. So those were my ratings could be a little easier on the books, but I'm usually pretty tough when it comes to TV and movies. And for me, that Skeleton Crew, I'm gonna go 3.25 out of 5. It got to 3.5 for me quite a few times, but there were also times when it was like 2.5, 3 a few times. I think just to level it out, 3.25. Maybe that's a little unfair. Maybe watching the show again, I'll get it to 3.5 because it is kind of close to that. I did really enjoy the show. I think it's a really fun show, very entertaining, good character development for the most part. But I think there were things left on the table, not just as a Star Wars fan, but as a fan of TV, as a fan of film. I think there are a lot of character beats left on the table. So even though the through line story was relatively small, it kept its focus. It didn't need to branch out and change the galaxy. It's there were moments there that I felt like were missing that would have solidified it as a 3.5 or 3.75 out of 5. But right now, it's closer to that 3.25, 3.5 range for me.
I would go with a 3.5 out of 5. I think for me, it really was the fact that any of my qualms that I had with it, especially after the last episode where I'm like, "Oh, man, we had the parents right there, use that same amount of runtime, add another minute," and I think I would have been way, way more, like, enthusiastic about their role in this finale. But again, like I said, I was hooping and hollering a lot of this finale. I loved a lot of the jokes. I think this is probably one of the better finales since Mando season 2, and there's been some great action in all of them, like, without a doubt. But I think this is the one that had the most confidence in a while because it
Yeah.
didn't rely on that cameo. It didn't rely on some big Legends pull or something like that that we, fair or not, we definitely did speculate because that's kind of the expectation that's become
Mhm.
built in with Disney Plus shows now that we've seen them for 5 years now, 6 years almost. So, I think the confidence of that finale really does keep it at a nice 3.5 instead of slipping for me. I think it locks it in there for me. Like Liam said, I really do wish the parents had a little bit more than just, trying to use, like, a really bad USB that had a malware on it and or tracer, whatever you wanna call it, and then a relay race for a beacon. If they had, like, a little bit of corporate espionage, if they had some stuff that revealed stuff about their upbringing and the world of At-Atten and made it a little bit more of a character without necessarily having to become these equally as important characters as the kids, I would have loved the show even more, and I think it would have pushed to a 4. Maybe not quite gone there because I do like a little bit more of the maturity that is still there in a Mandalorian, in a Book of Boba Fett, in an Acolyte, in an Andor especially. Uh, but for a kid's first intro to Star Wars, I think this is hard to beat. They're not going to pay attention to the parent storyline anyways compared to the kids, and the only parent like figure they're going to look at is Jod, who is handled super well and super well completed and evolved probably by Jude Law. So, yeah,
Mhm.
3.5 out of 5 for me. I really hope that the kids show up in, like, an animated show or, like, a single episode of another, Star Wars show set in the universe because I wanna see them back on screen as soon as they can.
Anthony also says, I don't really care if people say that the audience numbers are not there. The ratings have been good and I love it. That's all that matters to me. And that's all that should matter to you is your
Yeah.
experience with the show. Don't care about what anybody else says. Don't care about what we say. Just enjoy talking about the show that you enjoyed watching. And I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I think overall, my bar was a 3. Coming into like watching the show, I was hoping it was a 3 out of 5 because for me that's a good rating. I that's a movie or a show I liked, uh, but it did get a little bit above that for me. So I enjoyed it overall, and I'm glad you did too, Anthony. And then Anthony asks the question, and this is a big topic that we haven't got to cover or give our thoughts on yet, but definitely worth talking about. What do you guys think of Balin being recast as Rory McCann? He has some big shoes to fill. He's a good actor and can physically fit the part, but do you think they could have just continued Balin? Um, what oh, in a story or comic or novel. Um, I think it's amazing casting. It's somebody I didn't think about. We all go to more of the at least B to A list actors when we think of recasts, especially. But Ray Stevenson was kind of a B C list actor in general before. He had some big roles. He had a couple leading roles like Punisher, but for the most part, he played side characters and was a character actor at times. And he embodied Balin, did such a great job disappearing into that role because he was a little bit less famous or iconic. And Rory McCann is iconic, especially if you've watched Game of Thrones, but he won't have the scars as you see in Game of Thrones. So I think part of that iconography of his face, things that make him really distinct, those will kind of disappear because they he that's so part of his character, part of the character he's most known for. But I think casting an actor like him with the talent, with the physical role, Balin is such a physical character. I was worried they would cast somebody who was a little bit smaller or not as bulky as Ray Stevenson was. And with Rory McCann, you're arguably getting somebody who's even bigger. So I think it's fantastic casting. I'm sure he can do a solid interpretation of what Ray Stevenson did in the voice department for Balin, keep it fairly close. And I think it's really, really great. When I heard that, it was like an instant yes, even if it wasn't something I thought about once in my kind of fan casts for replacing Ray Stevenson.
Can he fit the shoes of Ray Stevenson? I think he might be made for them because Ray was six
Mhm.
three. I believe Rory's like 6'6", so he's actually taller. But, a little bit more serious answer, they were friends in real life, apparently fairly close too, so stepping into your friend's shoes, that's gotta have a lot of weight and a lot of emotion behind it, right? But at the end of the day, I think that's gonna be a smarter choice because there's so much that he wants. I know just as a person, forget about as a Star Wars fan, as a professional actor, to, like, say, "Hey, like, I need to ensure Rey's presence, his essence in this story as much as possible," even though things will definitely change with some of the direction, with some of the story, with some of the physicality, right? How can I bring Ray and have him there in season 2, even though I kind of have to be him now, right? Like, and I think that's going to be a challenge. I think he's definitely up to it, especially with such an interesting story that the Hound gets to go on. I don't really love the ending for the Hound. I think it works thematically, but I think a lot of stuff that worked thematically just didn't work time wise for a lot of Game of Thrones last 2.5 seasons, honestly. Um, but yeah, I think he's gonna do a great job. I'm very curious to see him not like a deadbeat looking guy with scars and like just kind of hates him. Like the whole point about Balin is that he's prim, he's posh, he's from an older era, kind of like Count Dooku. It's just what would Count Dooku look like if he had stayed around a little longer and became a little bit less evil and just more dissatisfied, So it'll be pretty interesting. It will be pretty interesting, and I think it's a really smart choice to go with an actor who, like Liam said, isn't supremely famous, but has this really strong connection to the character already through the original actor.
Anthony sent in another super chat. Thank you so much for supporting the show again tonight, Anthony. We really appreciate it. Anthony says, "You guys have one of the only spaces online where we can disagree, but also talk about the things we love, and the best place for me to say that I'm a sequels and prequels fan, a Legends and canon fan." And we're happy you really feel that because we're fans of all those things too. I mean, even with the critiques we have about some of the newer stuff or critiques we have about some of the things with the sequels, critiques we have with some of the things about the prequels, it doesn't really diminish the fact that we're fans of all of it. We want to make the best out of all of it, and we're always trying to be optimistic and pick the good things out. Star Wars is a single continuity. It's a single history. And so when bad things happen in it, when things we don't necessarily like happen in it, kind of need to look for the best side. Otherwise, we're going to be eternally upset because it's a part of the history now of this story. So that's kind of the way I've always looked at it. And I'm glad that rubs off on you because we, again, started this channel looking for people like you, looking for people that felt the same way, that appreciated every side of Star Wars in some way and tried to put it all together in a way that best fit. Absolutely need to have criticism, absolutely leave disagreement in the air. But I think when you have disagreement, that's healthy because it tries to breed the best out of something. When you don't critique, means that you either don't care or it really mostly means you don't care if you don't critique. So I think critique is very important. Disagreement is very important, but of course, always in a respectful, thoughtful, conversational way, like we try to do on the channel. So thank you so much, Anthony, as always, for joining our shows, for supporting our shows. And we look forward to having you more on the channel, continuing into the future.
Yeah, you'll never see us be a channel that's grifting and saying everything about Star Wars sucks now, everything in the past was better. We grew up as prequel kids. We know just how lambasted those were. People literally made documentaries saying the people versus George Lucas and
Hmm.
movies like Fanboys and all that that were just there to like stomp out any sort of love kids like us growing up had for the prequels, right? I mean, people forget that era had so many original trilogy games like Rogue Squadron and everything leading into episode one, and so much of the merch like I'm wearing a digital blue shirt from episode one. I don't think this brand, when you look at like Star Wars fashion, has been touched honestly in terms of like some of the most unique designs. There are so many things from so many different parts of Star Wars with how massive it is as a franchise that you can love. Story to, you know, designer t-shirts, right? You can think of it in so many different ways. And that's how I think Star Wars should always be looked at. Right now, like my disappointment with the sequels is less so what is there, it's just why aren't we doing more with it? Why aren't we fleshing it out? Why aren't we doing like what Lucas did with the Clone Wars, with all these other multimedia, like the '03 multimedia and then the '08 multimedia for everything kind of going on with the Clone Wars and all these tie-ins. Like we're missing that. And we're finally starting 10 years after The Force Awakens with stuff like Kylo Ren comics set between 8 and 9, right? Like that's just how it is. And like Miss Mandarin, you say right now we can agree to disagree. I still give Star Wars a chance every time, but there are things I honestly didn't enjoy. That's awesome, right? Because you're saying that and you're not trying to put down anyone in particular about their background, who they are, what they think. That's a very common thing during the sequel era. That's a very common thing during the prequel era. It's always been a common thing in this fandom, and that sucks, right? So, like I said, we're not gonna ever be a grifter channel just saying everything about Star Wars sucks every time to get views and all that and money, because you can do that. There are plenty of channels in any sort of medium, in any sort of franchise that once they go full negative, they do get, you know, short-term success, right? And it does last fairly long with the YouTube ecosystem. Well, we know we could have done that, right? But it's like what Yoda says, the dark side, it's quicker, more seductive, right? But it's not ever stronger, right? And at the same time, we're never going to be delusional like some of the prequel Jedi were, where it's like, oh, everything is fine, right? Like, I'm not going to be that type of person that's going to hype up every single thing about Star Wars. Like, there are definitely channels out there that do that. But then it just becomes like, okay, you enjoyed it, great, but what do you have to say? are you thinking about it? Are you actually thinking about some of the political messaging? Are you thinking about the inspirations? Are you thinking about why, how, where, when, right? And when you start doing that, you're like, "Yeah, maybe I like this in this show, and then I didn't like it in that other show, and I can see that they're trying to pull from this old movie from the '60s, but maybe that didn't click the same way." Or like, "Oh, that storyline is pulled straight out of a book I read, in a wholly different franchise, but I feel like they really added some great Star Wars-isms to it," right? Like, that's how we've always approached our media even before we became, film majors together. So that's why this is always gonna be a space where you can say what you wanna say because I feel like we've done a great job cultivating a community where nobody's on the same page, except for the fact that the one page we're all on is that we're gonna share and be respectful. That's all that we want, and I think we've done a good job, and we hope that you share our channel with other people who are like-minded like you, who you enjoy having conversations with, knowing that you're not gonna have 100% success rate on everything, right? Liam and I don't, and that's what makes us both stronger Star Wars fans. I don't think I've been any less of a Star Wars fan because of this channel. I think I've only become stronger through our friendship and through this channel. Like, there's things about Star Wars I'll never get like Liam does, and there's things about Star Wars he'll never get like I do, and that's the beauty of it.
Absolutely. Everybody comes at a different from a different place. There's so much of it now that it's hard to really truly like anything. Anytime a franchise or everything, every time a franchise gets this big, there's going to be misses. Every time a
Yeah.
franchise gets this big, there's going to be hits. And what you do is you either take what you like about the misses and you try to analyze them so that the filmmakers and the people around the show can do better and take that advice, or you talk about what you love or what you hate, and we try to do kind of both. I mean, yeah, there's been plenty of things. I think 2024 is a great example of how our channel functions. There's been plenty of things. If you go back and watch our Acolyte reviews, I am very negative on that show, and Sanak tries to kind of keep the peace a little bit more positive. Um, but then you watch our Skeleton Crew coverage, and we're pretty positive because the show is better. And so, like, it's just honesty. It's all honesty. It's what we think. So you can agree to disagree like you do, Mrs. Mandarin, and that's awesome. That's what we want. We want you to come on here and tell us why we're wrong, but tell us why we're wrong with facts and with your information, and with your opinions on Star Wars, rather than just because it's a show that you think people shouldn't like. And I think that's what we get on our channel. We really appreciate all you guys in the chat because you guys come every week and you deliver your thoughts and you let us know your honest opinions, and that's all we can ask for. That makes us all a stronger community together. Anthony says, awesome episode, easily 10 out of 10. I'm glad you really enjoyed it, Anthony. And then also says it was good to know SM-33 survived. Yeah, I was hoping he survived. I figured he probably would because it was a droid, but it was awesome to see him again. I thought it was a lot of fun how KB was holding his head and he was flying the ship. I thought that was really a nice touch. Anthony also says Jod's story makes sense, but what happens to him now? I think you meant to say. And do you guys think there will be a season 2? We kind of answered that already. I think there will be, or there should be a season 2. Will there be a season 2? I think it is up in the air just because of one of the reasons that we've heard constantly from kind of information leaks and all that around the Acolytes cancellation is purely that it's not just the critical comments from a lot of fans, not just the negativity around the show, but it was also, and more importantly, the numbers around the show. So I think if Skeleton Crew doesn't really have a great second half of the season, because we're just seeing the numbers on Nielsen and stuff for the first half of the season, if it doesn't have a great second half of the season and worse, completely falls off like the Acolyte did, where the Acolyte started here and just completely tanked in viewership. If Skeleton Crew slowly grows or stay about the same, I think the positive word of mouth, I think the overall positive critic reception, and I think just the general fandom around the show that it's cultivated now, the way it should continue to kind of grow. I do think we'll see a season 2. Will it be right away? I don't know. Hopefully it's soon because the stars are the kids and they're going to keep growing up, and eventually it won't be a kids show anymore because they're going to be too old for it. So you kind of have to get it going soon, but definitely think there should be a season 2. And with Jod, I think he's about to go to jail, and we'll see what happens to him later. I kind of think maybe it's a Loki-esque situation where it's like they kind of need him for their next adventure, and he's gonna go, but he's gonna be guarded by a, a New Republic agent or somebody who's saying we need to keep a close eye on him, and he tries to escape, but then maybe also kind of befriends the kids as the adventure goes along. And I think you see him turn into an anti-hero a little bit. I compared him in predictions to Talon Card a little bit. I don't think quite Talon Card had a little bit more of a heroic streak right off the bat than Jod has, but I think he can play that similar underworld story for whatever new version of the Thrawn conflict they're creating for the Mandalorian side of the New Republic universe.
Yeah, echo a lot of the same things there. The only thing I would say is because the show is so confident in not having like a visible character cameo from the Mandoverse or from other Star Wars media, yes, the kids are definitely aging up, but we could also just be like, "Oh, this was set like a year before, uh,
Mhm.
Mando season 1," and then they can be lined up in sync with something that happened already in season 2 or 3 or after Mandalorian Grogu, like, that's I think that's a really strong thing about the show that they've actually accounted for a lot of stuff, like, almost accounted for, like, "Hey, the show could just be a one-off, that's fine, but we got kids who could be great voice actors, a lot of other see them show up in animation or something, you can go that route." Or like, "Hey, John can be an agent of the underworld," like Liam is saying, show up in a different one with Bubba or something, right? Like, there's a lot of ways that you can use these characters, even if they're not necessarily the skeleton crew that we're used to, like, where they're leading the story. They could be, like, an episode of another show and be the hugely important supporting characters, right? There's a lot of ways to make these kids work and play with the timeline, which I think is really nice and really sweet. We've heard rumors that, like, from Annie Jacinto that, oh, an Acolyte, they were planning of doing, like, a 3 seasons and a movie. That's what he said, like, that was the ultimate dream, and, I mean, we were talking about it, like, Mandalorian Grogu was never planned as a movie. It was a 4th
Mhm.
season, so that one seems like a show that had so much ambition to it that once it maybe played out, might have actually worked on a lot of the flaws of season 1, but it was asking so, 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 so much. Skeleton Crew was saying, "Let's just make a fun little self-contained Goonies adventure." And then keep the door open just a little bit and in a multitude of ways, right? So I think that is really the advantage of the show, and hopefully that word of mouth that we've been seeing and just like the uptick on our channel is a sign that the show in the next 2, 3 weeks stays fairly steady in viewership and gets to, steal away like a number 9 or number 10 position on Nielsen.
Anthony says season 2 could expand on Wim's story where he gets to explore the galaxy and continue Jod's story. What do you think Jod does now, and do you think he has some moments of clarity when we see him looking at his defeated crew? Jod, we know now, was a Boken Jedi, not an Order 66 survivor, just a nobody who was trained by an Order 66 survivor. So we can all agree that Jude Law and all the child actors were awesome in their role. Favorite character for me is Wim and Jod. Well, I think that's certainly what the show's implying. When you see Wim looking off in the distance, kind of broom boy esque from the Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker as it's something very traditional with Star Wars storytelling. The character looking beyond, looking in awe of what's around them, and dreaming of more. And that is one story thread that they certainly did a good job with Wim throughout this show was the ups and downs of what it would be like to be a kid on this adventure, right? You want nothing more than this adventure. We see that out of Wim in the first episode, but then once he gets on the adventure, it's more overwhelming than he expected. But then as it starts to come to a close and he survived and he learned things and he was able to, create this whole fantasy for himself, he was a little disappointed it was coming to a close. And I think him looking up off into the stars, he certainly has a role to play. Now, what they do with letting kids go on more adventures in the society, they wouldn't make them necessarily their next emissary or anything. So who knows what the story will truly be, but I think it is going to be something where the kids are needed because of their knowledge of the outside galaxy, and Jod is going to end up being needed because of his knowledge of the pirates. And I think a lot of that is going to kind of come to a head. It would be really fun, honestly, if they made like Hondo the villain of season two, and Jod is familiar with Hondo or familiar with some of the pirates, and he's like, I need, or they need me to get them past certain pirate checkpoints or take down certain pirates. Because we've also found out a little tidbit in this episode, not that it was more than just a throwaway line, but Kim says that the New Republic are the best pirate hunters in the galaxy, so it is something they're actively doing, is hunting down these pirates, and maybe The Mandalorian season 3 was the impetus for them really getting going on hunting down pirates and not just hunting down Imperial agents. Because there is the whole conflict on in that season with that episode where they defeat Corian Shard, where Carson Teva has to kind of go rogue and convince people that they should go help the Mandalorians because the New Republic's like, we're busy doing other things that aren't related to this. And so now, if this takes place after, now they're seemingly that conflict might have started this whole pirate hunt. It'll be interesting if season two kind of goes more into that, if it's a full on pirate hunt with these kids and with Jod as kind of the guides for getting into the full defeat of these pirates.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of places to go with Wim's story. I think it would make a lot of sense for season 2 to have him and Fern be a little bit more outright leads in some episodes, kind of like how they were in the first few episodes here before the back half really kind of shifted to an equal balance amongst all four of the kids. Uh, they could be a crew, they could be separate and show up in different ways. We don't know what it means that the New Republic is here with the barrier completely down. Like, it's not just them that's going to be affected; it's going to be parents. And I wouldn't be surprised with the huge amount of skills needed to keep this very self-contained world with its own mint and everything running. That their skills are going to be super valuable in the galaxy, right? And that could open up so many opportunities for them where maybe they're not all together anymore. Maybe they're, jumping around different planets and joining academies. Like, I'd love to see, like, them be in some academy and deal with espionage and be like, "Okay, yeah, we jumped around the galaxy. Now let's go into the crevices of a planet and of a society," right? Like, there's so many ways to get their unique skills and honestly give them a foot up over their peers, but then once they're put into this new environment, they're like, "Okay, how do we handle it?" Right? This is their world, not ours, right? I think there's so many ways where you can keep the same dynamic, grow them out, but still feel familiar, right? So I'd love that a little bit more than just having them be individuals. If they're individuals, it should be in like animation. I think that's the only place I'd kind of like that, like a whim trying to join the New Republic Defense Fleet Academy or something like that, because he definitely did stare at that X-wing a bit, and before the show, like, he'd seen Jedi and all this and that, but I don't think he necessarily thought about ships in the same way, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't think there's really ships flying on at anything more than just hovering. Like, this was the first time he could be like, oh, they're not just big carrier ships or like some crazy wreckages for pirates. Like, they can be sleek, nimble fighters that have so many ways of attacking and maneuvering. Like, I think that everyone's worldview is gonna change. I'm very excited to see the kids change, with time in between whatever their appearance is, and I really, really do hope that they stick as a crew because there's just so much more for them to explore. If we're not gonna deal with the parents anytime soon, just cut them out of the equation and put these kids in a new scenario, so that's how I'd look at it. Jod, what happens to him now? That's a tough one. I mean, I think the look that he kinda gives them, it's a resignation, but it's almost like a very romantic viewpoint of his life, like, seeing his life, the only thing that he's somewhat succeeded in, slowly, slowly descending and falling apart. And he's like, "You know what? Like, I'll just go down with it in my own way," right? And I think he's gonna be arrested, clearly, but like Liam and I have been both saying, he's gonna be used in some other way. You don't bring a Jude Law just for a one-off show, and when he's this well received, especially. I think he's got way too much potential, and he
Mhm.
teases so much, right? Like, you bring up the point like, "Oh, he's a broken Jedi." I don't know if I'd say that. I think he's the way I looked at it, it was like this Jedi found him like in the slums, noticed his ability, like he had a potential, showed him like the very beginnings of something, and then Order 66 happened. So he wasn't even like formally apprenticed. It was more like a kid that, oh, I'm gonna contact the Jedi and we're gonna start the process, right? And we've got Anakin, we've got some of these older Padawans now, and they seem to be doing okay. Maybe it's good to get into this 6 or 7 year old kind of against the original three or younger policy, right? And then bam, Order 66 happens. Like, it feels very similar to like a very early days aside Ventress kinda wreck, where it's like he found her on this mission, sort of this exile that he's on, trains her up, and then it goes wrong when he dies, but you don't I wouldn't call her a full-on Jedi until she's like, formally calling him master and all that. It's more like he says he just learned from this Jedi, and then it all went south, right? So that's how I
Mhm.
look at it. Um, but yeah, it's gonna be exciting for him. I think he's gonna be a really fun character to follow up no matter what. Uh, it's just a matter of, seeing just how much you can really pull out of his story and where the space is in the Manoverse before it starts becoming a cameo fest.
Trent says, "Heyo, hi Trent. Hope you're having a good night." Anthony says, "I've been looking forward to this. I want a season two. Nerd dads are awesome. My dad was one." I completely agree. Speeder bike chase were awesome. I agree with that as well. It was they were fast, which is something we've been wanting to see them
Miss it.
be, especially in TV. Kylie Stewart says, "What do you think will happen with Jod since he was still in the Watchtower at the end of the finale?" I think we kind of just answered our predictions for Jod, but if we didn't, let us know and we'll go back to that question if you had something more you wanted to hear out of that. Anthony says these kids were the epitome that you don't need extraordinary powers to do extraordinary things. Yeah, that's often a motif in fantasy and sci-fi, and I think it worked pretty well here. It's certainly classic. This show has a lot of classic elements to it. I think I think that's another thing with season two is season two refines those classic elements. Doesn't just say, "Hey, we're going to embrace all these different things from '80s nostalgia pieces and kids entertainment, adventure films. We're not going to just take everything and just plug it into different little episodes. We're going to now take what is Skeleton Crew, what Skeleton Crew used those motifs to create, and now move forward and create a further identity for Skeleton Crew. And that's another reason I want to see season two is just it will help create the Skeleton Crew space in and around '80s nostalgia and a nostalgia for '80s adventures. And I think season one does a decent job of that by the end of it, but it still is more I would say more of an homage than actually like its own thing. And I hope that season two really just takes it and says, this is why Skeleton Crew is unique. It deserves to be a part of that kind of legacy in that pantheon.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kids at some point will have to have a reckoning, and I want to see that play out. And they're not on the timeline of the Stranger Things kids, right? Like they did some extraordinarily awesome things in the season, but can they do it again, right? Is there a supernatural being with them? No, there's no girl like 11 that's gonna kind of be like their trap card on any of the villains they're gonna face. They are kids who seemingly don't have the force, right? They have KV, who's probably the most superpowered of them, and that's because she's got implants, which in some ways, this is a disability. She can't do the same things like her friends can, but she's learned to actually harness that and become like a younger Lobot where she can access systems, keep nods, photographic memory, all these wonderful things, right? So yeah, I think it's gonna be awesome to see what they can do, and without having to be on that Stranger Things timeline where it's like a year after year after year, almost basically for the first 3 seasons before they kinda slow down with COVID and strikes and all that. This is a show where they can be like, "Okay, we're gonna bring it back, retool it." They're gonna be straight up teenagers now. What does it feel like to be a teenager after that adventure that shapes so much of how you view yourself and your self-image? Right? You can
Mhm.
start getting darker, more mature. Like I said, there's so many interesting settings that they could pull from teenage films. Like, you don't have to go high school on us. We kinda already finished whatever we wanted about school. We can do some things that are more relevant and can give a perspective about the underlying foundation in the New Republic. What is strong? What isn't strong? Like, what is the darkness seeping into it? What is the stagnancy of all that, right? And it'll be different. It might not be same way as action that we got here in season 1, but it can definitely unveil a lot of things that, we don't really expect these kids at this time and this moment to really be able to handle as they're growing up in this galaxy that is now fully open to not just them, but their parents too.
Millennium Falcon. All right, I added the Falcon part. Says I give the episode a 9. Kylie Stewart says they're probably making a second season where kids and adults get to go on an intergalactic adventure to make more trust with each other. And yeah, I want to see the adults more a part of season two too. I think that could be a way where the kids do get involved, is if the adults are sent on some mission and something goes wrong and the kids
Mhm.
are with them. That could also be a starting point for season two. Anthony says, honestly, could say I was never bored with the show, but I do wish there was an end credit scene with Jod. Yeah, I do too. I really expected an end credit scene the way it ended. I think it's not a bad image to end the show on with Wim looking up at the X Wings, but it is kind of quick. Like there's so much
Yeah.
of an epilogue there. So we're like, what's the New Republic now? Their first conversation with Atten. What happens to this civilization that's been so perfect for 1,000 years? How do they rebuild? How do they what happens to Jod? There's so many things that were left there that just I feel like an epilogue was needed, or at least another like 5 minute scene before it cut. And then you could have had maybe an X-wing pilot standing there by his ship and leaning on it, and Wim's like looking at him like, I want to be that guy kind of thing. Or a conversation between Wim and the pilot. I think there's other ways you can deliver the same message while also giving us a little bit more a little bit more about the stuff we've been invested in. I think that was also something, not to go on another little tangent, but that was also another thing I was a little disappointed as the show started to wrap up, was like the lore and kind of idea around Atten was so interesting in the first 4 or 5 episodes before the information was revealed about what it was. And then the show kind of felt like it just dropped it. It didn't continue what makes Atten so different, what makes at in a special place in history. How does that relate to the New Republic? How does that relate to what's going on currently in the galaxy? Just kind of drop that whole thing once you find out where Atten is, and once you find out what Atten is, and then that's kind of that was kind of a disappointment for me because I was intrigued on the Old Republic connections at the beginning. But also this episode did reveal that at the very least the supervisor had contact with the Republic all the way into when it switched to the Empire. So even maybe he didn't have direct contact, but he was at least on the channels that got the information out of the Republic because they knew that the Jedi were branded as traitors. So um, I feel like that's something I could have done maybe a little without, because now I feel like it adds a little like plot hole, or at least an explanation that you need to make about, okay, where's this old Republic credits planet in relation to the Republic? How did Palpatine operate? Why did, when he switched it to the Empire, did he not communicate with them anymore? Was it just something they intercepted and they weren't really in communication with the Republic for a long time? Do they still have an emissary in the Republic who has the code still? This all these different questions were created for me, and maybe that's what they're wanting to do, but I think it's just another little piece of like the lore of this planet that we could have just used a little bit more of.
Yeah, I agree a lot about what you said about Atten. You know, it's I think when we saw the end credits, as nice and stylish as they were, when they kind of show out like the tablet data pad, I was like, oh, we're gonna see something like maybe an announcement or something to like connect us to a cameo character or like the events of the Mandoverse so far. And there wasn't, you know, it just was a skeleton crew logo. So a little disappointing there. I think that would have been a great chance to have like the HoloNet news, you know, kind of show up
Yeah.
or something. But that's fine. It is like I think Miss Mandarin makes the fact like I was enjoying it until the end. I had mixed feelings, but the ending acts were not satisfying, left me empty. But I guess if they're gonna have another season, that's good. Yeah, I think the more we talk about it, it really is that last 5-10 minutes. You're like, man, if you put another 5 more minutes and give it a little bit of time to breathe, just tease a little bit more stuff, have some stuff with the kids and the parents and the aftermath of everything. I think people would have been even more satisfied. I think for the most part, it's one of the most confident finales that we've had from Star Wars since Mando Season 2's. But is it missing just a little extra there? Is it left on the table? Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I agree with I agree with a lot of that. And Mrs. Mandarin, that's completely fair to feel that way too about the episode. Hopefully season two fixes some of those problems for you. Nate Dog says zero cameos is what made Andor and Rogue One so good. Well, Andor and Rogue One have a lot of cameos. It's
Yeah.
just the fact it doesn't necessarily rely on them to sell the product. I think that's kind of more of what you mean, because there's some would argue Rogue One has too many cameos. There's Rogue
Ponda
Leader, Old
Baba.
Leader. There's Ponda Baba, Dr. Evazon. There's all these, or Chopper. All these things that pop up. The Ghost, but I think I understand what you mean, and I applaud the show for not giving in to the temptation of just being like, will find a way to shoehorn Din Djarin, like, make him appear in a scene for some reason, because they really could have, and, it could have been the most obvious setup for a new show or a new movie since the Asajj Ventress appearance in The Bad Batch, and, they decided to go away from that. I do admire that, and it is something that focus is something that makes Andor really strong, even if there are the occasional cameo, it's usually on plot, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it is just it is a show that has made a choice and stuck by it. And yeah, Andor had plenty of cameos. We see so many Rogue One cameos. And Rogue One's got Tarkin, it's got Leia, it's got Vader, it's got quite a few
Yeah.
names, some big hitters. So I think you're like Liam said, you're saying like cameos leading the way, not necessarily just a cameo.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the intent behind the comment. Next up is Anthony, who says Jod could be the Star Wars Deadpool. I don't know if they're going to make him that specifically violent, but I think he can be an anti-hero like Deadpool. I think he could be
Yeah.
somebody. I think Loki is a better comparison personally for where I think they can take the story. Not that he'll ever get his own like show and be a full-on hero at some point, but I think Loki's a better comparison, especially what they did with Loki in Thor: Dark World and Thor: Ragnarok, where he was genuinely you weren't sure when he was going to stab everybody in the back, but he was probably going to, and I think that's the trajectory we see Jod in. And Jude Law is a great actor to be able to play that type of role. I think
Oh yeah.
if you do give him enough time, if you do give him enough development, he is somebody who could crisscross shows. He could show up in a movie. He could really be an interesting part of this universe if they want to give him that material. But we might all just be optimistic Star Wars fans, and they could just say he's not even in the next season, and that's also a possibility for the show.
Yeah. No, I think I wouldn't want him to show up in too many things or, like, be like, "Ah, I'm the connective glue now. I'm that guy," right?
Yeah.
Deadpool is Deadpool because he's insane and crazy, and it's like, alright, gory as like heck, like, holy snap. Like, it is not something I'd like Jaw to do because he even shows, like, when he thinks KB's died, he's like you can see that it hurts him. Like, it didn't have to be this way, right? I if they showed KB and all the kids, and I feel like he would've had a moment where he's like a little happy, like, "Oh my god, thank God," and he'd be, like, happy to be escorted away or something, right? Like I said, he's a romantic at his heart. He wants things to go the way he envisions them, and he can't help to have some of these better qualities kinda stick out. It's just he's spent so much of his life in such terrible, crappy situations that he's like, "No, that's not how it is. It's gotta be like this," and then this was gonna give him a lot to think about, these kids and their parents and what they achieved against him, so, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what he does next. Loki, like you said, is a good one. Deadpool, I think, is just he's chaos. I don't think Jaws is really chaos in the same way.
Well, we're going to wrap up our show here soon in a couple minutes. So, again, if you want to send in one last super chat so you guarantee to get your comment on tonight's show, please feel free to do that. If not, no big deal. Just giving you guys that opportunity. And we will be back for those of you who are just finding our channel for the first time, maybe watching on replay or just joining us for our Skeleton Crew coverage overall. We do this every week, and it turns into the mostly just this taking your guys' questions, comments about anything you want. It doesn't even have to be Star Wars. So join us next week and for every Tuesday into the Andor season 2 premiere in April, and we will be doing that for the next few months as we lead up to it. So make sure you join us. If there are changes to show dates, or sometimes if there's a conflict, we'll let you know on the community page. But generally, every Tuesday, 7:30 p.m., we go live Pacific time. All right, so I think this will be probably our last one we take here, and that is wait, I lost it. Mrs. Mandarin. One thing that bothered me was the teaching or standpoint. The Jedi are not good theme. I mean, I guess the kids looking up to the pilots that saved them is a good thing. No assessment, but the boy will train to be a pilot. Disappointed in how weak the parents were, although they did help out at the end. I was hoping that the girl's mom had a crazy backstory, maybe a pirate or a daughter of a passing Jedi. I think those are interesting ideas. Personally, I didn't see any of that in what the show was telling us about the characters to really like expect anything out of the parents there. I agree in the parents the characterization was weak, but I kind of based on these characters expected them to be physically weak if you're more talking about physical attributes because they don't do anything other than go and do numbers. Like they're numbers people. They're all analysts and scientists. They're
Yeah.
not none of them are fighters. They don't have any fighters on this planet. They're completely protected by droids. So to me, that wasn't too big of a surprise. But as for the theme about the Jedi not being good, I don't think that's in the show at all. I think really it's about how Jedi or Jod is not a Jedi. I mean, even Wim has that moment in this episode where he's like, "You're not a Jedi." It was like the first time it really hit him that somebody who has the Force, somebody who can wield a lightsaber, all of that, they don't automatically become a Jedi. They don't represent what the ideals of the Jedi are. And even Wim in that kind of moment when he's grabbing the lightsaber with Fern, it's them kind of embracing the Jedi idea, even if they don't have the powers to be a Jedi. So I don't think that the show is trying to do kind of the acolyte deconstruction of the Jedi in any way, or we've seen that in some other material as well. I don't think this show is doing that. I think this show is really mm, talking about the Jedi in a very reverent sense, in a sense that they hold very high standards, and it's something that Wim and the characters in the show really respect and admire, and it's one of the reasons why they don't see the Jod twist coming, even though a lot of us could have watching the show. They don't see it coming. They're too trusting. They're too, um, especially for Wim. He fantasizes and imagines what a Jedi adventure would be, and so he's so obsessed and overwhelmed with Jod and with Jod's power that I think he, forgets he doesn't really learn until the end that there are grays in the lives of people, and just because you have the force doesn't make you instantly a good guy. And I thought that exchange between Wim and Jod was a good one about good guys and bad guys. So I thought all that was really well handled personally.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree about all the Jedi stuff. It is to me almost like the Iron Man question of Iron Man 3. You don't have to love the execution of that film, but I think the one thing it nails is that Iron Man is not just a suit. It is the embodiment of what an image is, like what that symbol means, right? It's such a huge thing about what Superman is, what Batman is. They're very symbolic heroes, right? So I think it's in the same way that I think a lot of like Star Wars channels really are like always like, oh, it's like the gray Jedi and all this and that. Like they start trying to like confuse what it means to be a Jedi. It's like a philosophy, it's a way of life. It's in some ways, and there in certain periods, it's more of a religion. In some ways, it's a martial practice, right? But the needs of the situation of the era of the Jedi of that time reflects the world, the galaxy that they're in, and how they need to be the best servants for that time, right? That's how it should be. And I feel like sometimes people look at that and they're like, "Oh, that doesn't really mean you're a Jedi. It just means you're a Force user." No, I just think it means that you're someone who understands that people change, institutions change, right? And the Jedi forget that. That's a huge thing about like the events of denial and everything that forces them down the Guardian protocols that seemingly becomes locked in by the acolyte that allows someone like a Chimera to make that deconstruction and the actions of Soul and others in that show to be like, oh, if I see the Jedi as a little bit more of a policing force controlled by bureaucracy and all that, it's not honestly, it's not super different than what we know from the prequels. That's kind of what's happening. It's just a little bit more revert there. And even that, I don't think is a like a terribly strong deconstruction of the Jedi. I'd say this is almost as equal because it's getting to the core of the issue that I think a lot of fans forget that it's like it's not just light or dark. It's like how do you embody the role? It's a whole lifelong dedication to be a Jedi and it changes and it grows, but it's never supposed to be something that you can like turn on and off and just say like, no, it's not this. It's because he felt in the dark. No, no, no. It's a lot more complicated. That it's not just saying when Jaw is like, oh, the Jedi were weak and miserable. Like it's we know it's flawed, right? But that's not what really matters to a kid like Wim who's got all these legends and all that, that he knows about the temples and he knows about the ancient practices and all that. What matters is that he sees a guy with a lightsaber, he's like, "I don't get that feeling. I get the feeling that he's a Jedi." So, I think that's how I looked at it, and I never personally got that same feeling. Oh, as God and others are saying that Jedi are like a bad institution or like bad in general, or they're not good. But I do agree with your point that, when looking up the pilots and all the kids looking up, they see, like, what the New Republic represents, and one especially might see that as, "I wanna be a pilot." That's a journey, that's a power that I can possibly handle more realistically, right? So, I think that's pretty great. I agree with all about the parents, you know? I think someone else down here, like Skull Leader said, like, "Does Jod realize the mass printing of all the currency with no backing flooding the market has no value?" Seemingly, it does have some value in the galaxy because I think it's from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, so there are enough of these out there. So,
Collectors.
yeah, I think there's enough, right? And it's gold. At the end of the day, it's gold. It's not like it's plastic credits or something. I think there's always gonna be some value there because it is something solid. But, yeah, I mean, that kinda just ties into what you're saying and what we've been saying. Everything on Atten started with a lot of potential. The parents had potential, the planet had potential, the Mint, what we saw, and all of it was good. It's just a few more minutes to pad out to raise some questions, to give the world a bit more of a world feeling instead of, like, just a big metropolis, suburban metropolis that they're all kind of centered around. I think that would have been what takes the show to the next level, but even then, a really, really fun, enjoyable ride.
Yeah, and that's going to wrap up our Skeleton Crew coverage with the episode 8 finale reaction. Thank you so much again for watching our coverage, not just tonight, but for the last 8 episodes. We really enjoyed discussing the show with you all, hearing your thoughts, your predictions in our predictions videos, your theories, your reactions, all of that. It's been a really great time. So thank you so much. Again, to reiterate, we're not going anywhere. Our channel operates Star Wars all year round. We're going to still have plenty of videos to watch if you're interested in video content, plenty of shorts to watch if you're interested in short content, all our community polls every day. We're going to have these live streams every single Tuesday. So if you're somebody who did enjoy our community, our style, our discussions, a lot of you in the chat come to these every week. So if you enjoy talking to other people in the chat who are here a lot of the times, join us every Tuesday, and we'll be back next Tuesday discussing whatever the latest news is and giving you guys a chance to give us your questions, your comments, anything you'd like about any topic. It doesn't even have to be fully Star Wars. So if you would like to join that, make sure you join us next Tuesday. Keep an eye out for the thumbnail. It usually goes live the day of, and it will have the time and the topics. And if no new topics come up, we'll probably talk about all this other news that we briefly talked about tonight. That there's been a lot of rumors and leaks in the last month or so around Star Wars, and there's been plenty of stuff to talk about. So we'll be doing all that next week and for the foreseeable future for the next about 3 months until Andor season 2 comes out. But keep around on Star Wars Lads. We'd love to have you all here on the channel and interact with you all consistently in these lives. So thank you so much for watching this video, for all the streams, for all the predictions, for all the coverage of Skeleton Crew. It's been a lot of fun. And we will see you guys all next week, hopefully, for our first live stream post Skeleton Crew. Good night, everybody, and may the force be with you all.